The silence on forward operating base Kraken was the worst part. Not the eerie quiet of a dead world, but the tense, breath-holding silence of 37 soldiers waiting to die. It pressed in on them from all sides, seeping through the thick plasteel walls and settling in their bones. Lieutenant Valeria Kovalenko, known to her squad as simply Valkyrie, ran a gloved hand over the base's primary tactical display for the 100th time. The holographic image flickered, showing their position, a small, rocky moonlet in the untidy Chirelian system. Their objective, now a bitter joke, was to secure this forward outpost for the incoming 7th Fleet. The reality was they were surrounded. Outside, the hulking insectoid forms of the Xylos Dominion moved with terrifying purpose. Their black, chitinous armor absorbed the light of the system's dim red sun. They didn't dig trenches or set up conventional siege lines. They built. Using a bioorganic slurry, they constructed towering, pulsating spires that crackled with alien energy, slowly but surely tightening an invisible noose around the base. "They're calibrating another resonance emitter," murmured Sergeant Kazan, the sole Variel in their unit. His large, liquid black eyes were fixed on a secondary sensor screen. The Variel were a race of empaths and scientists, their inclusion in a frontline unit a testament to the Galactic Coalition's desperation. The first one gave half the squad headaches that lasted a day. This one will start breaking bones, liquefying organs. Kovalenko nodded, her jaw tight. She'd felt the first one. It was like a drill bit buzzing just behind her eyes. They had maybe 6 hours before the second spire came online. "Command?" she asked, her voice a dry rasp. Corporal Jin, the comms specialist, just shook his head, his face pale. The comms console spat out nothing but a wall of screeching, harmonic feedback, the Xylos' way of telling them they were alone. The 7th Fleet was still 3 days out, engaged in a running battle 2 systems over. No one was coming. Not in time. "So that's it?" Private First Class Taggart, a hulking brute of a man from a high-gravity colony, slammed his fist on a supply crate. The metal dented. "We just sit here and let those bugs shake us apart from the inside?" "We hold," Kovalenko said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "That's the order." The mood in the bunker was a thick, choking fog of despair. They were a mixed species unit, the steady, rock-like tetrarchid with their 4 arms, perfect for manning multiple weapons. The nimble, quick-thinking Felidar, whose feline features were now twisted in fear, and the humans. The humans were the odd ones out in the Galactic Coalition. A freshly inducted species, technically brilliant and aggressively tenacious, but seen as too reckless, too loud. They lacked the centuries of stoic discipline of the Tetrarchid or the refined tactical sense of the Variel. They were useful for breaking things, but not for much else. Kovalenko, a human herself, felt the weight of that perception. Her team was good, they were brave, but against the cold, methodical horror of the Xylos, bravery felt like a candle in a hurricane. "Lieutenant," Kazan said, his voice soft. He was looking not at his screens, but at Private Marcus Thorne. Thorne was sitting by himself in a corner, away from the others. He wasn't checking his weapon or staring at the wall in fear. He was drawing. With a small stick, he was tracing patterns in a patch of dust on the floor. Kovalenko had noticed it before. During lulls, while others rested or prayed, Thorne often did this. He was their combat engineer, a quiet man from a colony world with no name, just a serial number and an unsettling calm. "What about him?" Kovalenko asked. "His emotional signature," Kazan murmured. "The rest of us, we are a symphony of fear, discordant, panicked. But him, he is a single, low, sustained note. Not calm, not brave. It's focus. Like a predator. I have never sensed anything like it from a human before." Kovalenko looked at Thorne. He was a big man, not with the bulked-up muscle of Taggart, but with the dense, solid build of someone who worked with his hands. His face, smudged with grime, was utterly blank as he drew. He didn't look up when another low-frequency tremor shook the base, dislodging a fine rain of dust from the ceiling. "Private Thorne," she called out. He looked up. His eyes were a calm, steady gray. "Lieutenant, got any bright ideas? The captain is indisposed." Their commanding officer, a tetrarchid, was in the medbay, unconscious from the first resonance attack. Command had fallen to her. Thorne stood up, wiping the dust from his hands. He walked over to the tactical display, his gaze not on the glowing dots representing the Xylos forces, but on the geological survey of the moonlet itself. He traced a finger along a ridgeline, then over a flat plain. "They've set up their spires on the bedrock," he said, his voice low, conversational. "Good choice for stability, but they didn't do a full seismic survey. Why would they? They're winning." He zoomed in on the plain. "This area here, 3 clicks east of their main encampment. It's a shallow, ancient lava tube system. The crust is deceptively thin." Jin stared at him. "So? We don't have the firepower to take out a spire from 3 clicks out, let alone the army guarding it. Our artillery is for defensive counter-battery, not offensive strikes." "Not with artillery," Thorne said. He pointed to the base's power core, a humming fusion reactor in the heart of the facility. "With that." A stunned silence fell over the command post. "Are you insane?" Taggart sputtered. "That's our only power, and blowing it up here won't do jack to a target 3 clicks away." "Not blowing it up here," Thorne corrected patiently. He turned to Kovalenko. "Lieutenant, what's the one thing the Xylos aren't prepared for?" She thought for a second. "Us. They're prepared for a siege. They're prepared for us to sit here and wait for relief." "Exactly," Thorne nodded. "They're methodical. They process information slowly but react perfectly to expected stimuli. They are not prepared for chaos." He laid out his plan. It was, by any traditional military standard, utterly insane. He would take a small team, not in armored vehicles, but in the base's 3 environment suits meant for EVA repairs. They would slip out of a service hatch on the far side of the base, away from the main Xylos force. Using the terrain for cover, they would traverse the 3 clicks to the thin-crusted lava tube. Meanwhile, the rest of the squad would begin a sustained but careful harassment of the main Xylos line. Not to break through, but to draw their attention, to make them look the other way. Thorne's team would carry the reactor core. They would have to physically haul the heavily shielded, incredibly dense cylinder of hyper-excited plasma across 3 kilometers of hostile territory. Once at the lava tube, they would breach the crust, drop the core in, and set a timer. The resulting explosion would be less of a bang and more of a planetary-scale seizure. The entire plane would collapse, taking the main Xylos encampment and their resonance spire with it. The shockwave and seismic shift will take out their command and their primary emitter, Thorne concluded. Without coordination, the rest of them will be thrown into disarray. We can pick them off as they try to regroup. The logic was sound. The execution was a suicide mission. "The reactor core weighs 800 pounds, Kazen said quietly. "Even in low G, who's going to carry that and fight?" Thorne just looked at him, then at Taggart, then at the 2 other human soldiers in the room. They were all looking back at him with the same flat, focused expression. They understood something the others didn't. "We are," Taggart said, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across his face. "Been lifting heavy since I could walk." Kovalenko stared at the plan. The odds of success were microscopic, but the alternative was to sit here and be liquefied by a weapon they couldn't fight. She was a lieutenant in a coalition that saw her species as useful idiots. Thorne was offering her a chance to die on her feet, fighting, and to take a significant chunk of the enemy with her. More than that, he was offering a chance to win. "All right," she said, her voice firming up. "Let's do it. Sergeant Kazen, you're with Thorne. You're our eyes and ears. Jin, you stay here. I want you to keep broadcasting our situation on every channel. If the fleet gets close enough, they need to know what happened here. If we fail, they need to know not to make the same mistake. The rest of you, with me. We're going to make some noise." An hour later, the plan was in motion. The base's guns roared to life, spitting suppressing fire at the Xylos lines. The alien response was immediate and predictable. They shifted their focus, their bioweapons beginning to pulse with sickly green light, returning fire. And out of a small, shadowed service hatch, 5 figures slipped into the moon's perpetual twilight. Thorn led the way, his faceplate a mirror reflecting the distant flashes of combat. Behind him, Taggart and 2 other humans, Privates Ito and Rodriguez, carried the shielded core on a makeshift anti-grav stretcher. The grav unit was ancient, straining under the load, sparking intermittently. They had to physically guide it, their suit muscles bulging with the effort. Kazen brought up the rear, his enhanced senses probing the darkness for any sign of a Xylos patrol. The journey was a nightmare of slow, agonizing progress. They moved from rock to rock, crouching in the shadows of shallow ravines. Twice they had to freeze as Xylos scouts skittered past, their antennae twitching. Kazen's whispered warnings were the only thing that kept them hidden. The humans carrying the core didn't speak. They just breathed, a steady, rhythmic chorus in Kovalenko's earpiece back at the base, where she was coordinating the diversion. "Thorn, this is Valkyrie. We're drawing heavy fire. They're committing more forces to the siege lines. You're clear for the next 10 minutes, max. After that, they'll figure out it's a feint." "Copy that, Valkyrie," Thorn's voice came back, calm as still water. "We're at the ridge line now. I can see the target zone." He peered over the edge of a low rock escarpment. Below them lay the plain, dotted with the pulsing organic shapes of the Xylos camp. In its center, the resonance spire hummed with a malevolent purple energy, making his teeth ache even through his helmet. And there, just beyond the camp, was the area he'd identified. To the naked eye, it looked like solid ground, but his suit's sensors, cross-referenced with the geological data, showed the void beneath. "The crust is right where the data said it would be," he reported. "We need to get to that cluster of boulders at the edge of the camp. It's the closest point with cover." Getting the core down the slope and across the final stretch of open ground was the hardest thing they'd ever done. The anti-grav unit finally gave out completely, screaming and dying in a shower of sparks. From then on, it was pure muscle. The 4 humans, grunting with the strain, physically lifted the shielded cylinder. They moved like a single, bizarre creature, a multi-legged beast carrying its heavy shell. Taggart's face was purple with exertion, veins standing out on his neck. Ito was silently weeping from the pain, but she didn't stop. Rodriguez's lips were pulled back in a permanent snarl. They made it to the boulders. They were so close now. Thorn could see the individual facets of the Xylos soldiers' eyes as they moved about their camp, less than 100 meters away. He could smell the acrid biological scent of their constructions through his suit's filters. "This is it," he whispered. "We breach the crust, drop the core, and get the hell out of the blast radius. We have 3 minutes on the timer. Go!" While the others held the core, Thorn pulled out a shaped demolition charge. He placed it carefully on the ground between 2 of the large boulders, where the rock was most fractured. He primed it, and they all pressed themselves against the boulders. The explosion was a sharp crack, swallowed by the thin atmosphere. It blew a hole in the ground, revealing the dark, beckoning maw of the lava tube below. "Now!" Thorn hissed. With a final Herculean effort, the 4 humans maneuvered the core to the edge of the hole. They tilted the stretcher. The heavy cylinder slid forward, hung for a heart-stopping second on the lip, and then dropped into the darkness. They heard it clang and scrape its way down into the ancient tunnel. Thorn was already at the timer, synced to his suit. He punched in the code. A red light began to blink on his wrist console. 180 seconds. "Move! Move! Move!" They ran. There was no more stealth. They scrambled back up the slope, their suits straining, their lungs burning. Behind them, a Xylos patrol finally noticed the movement. A chittering alien cry went up. "They've seen us!" Kazen yelled. "Keep moving!" Thorn roared, a sound so primal and commanding that it shocked even Kovalenko, listening back at the base. It wasn't the sound of a man fleeing. It was the sound of a man who had just set a trap and was now leading the prey into it. Laser fire, hot and green, began to scorch the rocks around them. Taggart grunted as a bolt grazed his shoulder pauldron, the metal sizzling. Ito stumbled, and Rodriguez hauled her back to her feet without breaking stride. They reached the ridgeline and threw themselves over it, sliding and tumbling down the other side just as another volley of fire chewed up the spot where they'd been standing. 90 seconds! Thorne yelled, not slowing down. They were in a dead sprint now, heading for a cluster of large rocks half a click away. It wasn't safe, but it was better than being in the open. "They're coming over the ridge!" Coxon warned, his voice high with terror. Thorne risked a glance back. At least a dozen Xylos warriors were cresting the ridge, their multi-legged forms moving with terrifying speed. They were gaining. 60 seconds! They weren't going to make it to the rocks. The Xylos were too fast. Thorne made a split-second decision. He stopped running, skidding to a halt in the dust. He turned to face the oncoming horde. "Thorne, what the hell are you doing?" Taggart screamed. Thorne didn't answer. He pulled his sidearm, a standard-issue kinetic pistol. It was useless against Xylos armor, but he wasn't aiming at them. He raised his pistol and fired 3 shots into the air, a signal. The Xylos hesitated for a fraction of a second, confused by this illogical action. Why would a fleeing prey animal stop and fire into the sky? The answer came 40 seconds early. Thorne had set the timer for 180 seconds, but he was a combat engineer. He knew his explosives, and he knew the Xylos were methodical. They would expect a timer to go off exactly when it was set. He had used a remote trigger synced to the motion sensors in his own suit. The moment he stopped running, the moment he turned to face them, his suit had sent a signal. The ground didn't just shake, it roared. A column of plasma fire erupted from the lava tube 3 clicks away. It was as if the heart of the small moon had suddenly decided to beat, just once, with impossible fury. The plane lifted, buckled, and then collapsed in on itself. The resonance spire, that symbol of their impending doom, toppled and was swallowed by the churning, molten rock that now filled the basin. The shockwave hit them a second later. It was a wall of superheated air and pulverized rock. Thorne was picked up and thrown like a rag doll, tumbling end over end. He lost his pistol, his helmet cracked on a rock, and the world became a symphony of noise and pain. Then, silence. He was lying on his back, staring up at the unfamiliar stars. His whole body screamed. He tried to move and found he couldn't. He was pinned by a large piece of debris. He could hear the ringing in his ears, and beneath it, the sounds of chaos. Back at FOB Kraken, the effect was instantaneous. The oppressive hum that had been building in their bones simply stopped. The Xylos forces, which had been pressing the attack on the base, suddenly lost all cohesion. Their command was gone. Their primary weapon was a smoking crater. They didn't retreat. They just wandered, disoriented, leaderless. Kovalenko didn't hesitate. "All units out of the bunker, this is it! Full assault! Give them hell!" The doors of the base slammed open, and the combined might of the coalition soldiers poured out. The Tetrarchid laid down suppressing fire with all 4 arms. The Felidar darted forward, their claws and blades finding the chinks in the confused Xylos armor. The humans, roaring with a fury that surprised even themselves, charged into the fray. It was a slaughter. The methodical, terrifying Xylos dominion brought low by a single insane act of human engineering. Hours later, the battlefield was silent. Kovalenko stood amidst the wreckage of the Xylos lines, her suit splattered with alien ichor. A medical team was carefully extracting a battered but alive Private Thorne from under the debris. Taggart was there, his arm in a sling, a wide, bloody grin on his face. Ito and Rodriguez were being treated for severe exhaustion and muscle strain, but they were alive. Kazan, miraculously, had only a few cuts and bruises. As they loaded Thorne onto a stretcher, his cracked helmet was removed. His face was a mess of cuts and bruises, but his gray eyes were open, and they were calm. He looked past the medic and found Kovalenko. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice a weak rasp. "Did it work?" Kovalenko looked around at the destroyed enemy, at her soldiers who were alive because of him, at the flickering lights of a coalition rescue shuttle finally breaking through the system's jamming. She thought of the look on Kazen's face when he'd explained the single, low, sustained note of a human's focus. She thought of the Galactic Coalition's carefully laid plans, their strategies, their fleets, their support. They had waited for it all. They had almost died waiting. "Yeah, Private," she said, a genuine, exhausted smile touching her lips for the first time in days. "It worked. They waited for support. They never realized they were looking right at it."